Hello friends, in this particular lecture I'm going to show you how to actually work with disk layout or disk management, and we're talking about doing this into Debian server. So in here I'm utilizing Debian 13, which is the latest versions of Debian. So one may ask, what is Debian? So very briefly, Debian is a Linux operating system, and it is the godfather when it comes to advanced package technology. So the Linux system is divided into two prongs. So one is basically Red Hat package management or RPM operating systems or Linux servers, and then you have APT-based Linux servers. So Debian is the best, or you can class it as like the godfather of all the Linux APT servers. So you need it for working if you want to becoming a web application developer, or what we call it, a Java developer per se, a full stack Java web application developer, or you could be working with full stack JavaScript for Python web application developer, or you could be still working as somebody who's working sys administrations in Linux side, or also development operations or DevOps. Okay, so you need these server side operating systems. This lecture is slightly different than other lectures because here I'm working with a disk. Okay, so we're talking about a hard disk, so it's a physical disk. Okay, so you get this disk when you buy a machine. The disk actually comes with your computer. So most of the people forget about everything and they just work with what disk it came with. So in my cases, it's a bit different because if you're becoming a server side developer, then you'll be working with a lot of different kind of disks. Okay, so you're talking about SATA disk or just a portable disk that you can actually plug in with your USB port. But in my case, it's a SATA 3.5-inch disk that is actually, you don't see it when you buy machines because the machine comes with it, but you can get it from eBay or Amazon. Just like SATA 3.5-inch, and I bought a lot of them, and you can actually station it, in a dock station. So you can buy portable dock stations, and then you can plug it up. That way is better because it's actually charging the dock, and have any fluctuations or the memory shortage or memory leakage or whatever you want to call it. You won't have much issues because the power is given by the external side. Okay, you can't really put it into a CPU unless you buy a Dell PowerEdge based rack servers. Okay, so if you have a portable machines like any machine that you can buy from anywhere, it comes with a CPU and it has only one or two SATA disk holders, okay, inside into the machine. Therefore, I do not know. One of my friend, who's a very good friend of mine, was telling that you can have a lot of different setup port inside. So you can actually keep the CPU open, wide open, and have but it is clunky because you actually end up having a disk open, your CPU machine is open, the machine cache is open. So I don't want to do that. So you have a port, what do you call it in here? I'm just going to show you through the webcam so you can see it. So these are the kind of port. Okay, so you have the dock, which is made by a company called Fideco, and then this is the disk. Okay, so these are the disks. This is a 500 gigabytes. Just don't get confused. This is 500 gigabyte of SATA 3.5-inch disk. Okay, but when it says 500 gigabyte, it's more like a marketing gimmick. Okay, so it is actually not a 500 gigabyte disk. Okay, so you remember that. So let me just put the camera back on. So I bought a lot of them, so I'm just going to show you one of them here. So this is it comes with a pack like that, very good pack, very good packaging. So I got quite a few of them. Okay, so these are the one that you can actually work with. So the 500 gigabyte is more than enough for installations of the operating systems. Okay, so the first part of the lecture is basically getting the physical bit out of the way before we get into the server and do the disk layout. So this is like this. Okay, you can see that. Okay, so this is 500 gigabyte disk. Okay, so this is made by Seagate, so a different company, and you can get it at fairly relatively cheap price. I paid roughly around $7, in US dollars, $7 for each. So that's really good. They are not new, but they are tested. So you're cool with it. You're really cool with them. So they work really fine. So they come with pins in here. So you can see the pins right here. So you got these pins, so you plugged up into your dock station. So you have this large set of pins in here in this side, and then you have a small set of pins in here. Okay, so you just dock it up in the station, and you're all good to go. So this lecture is what we're going to do is 500 gigabyte disk, which is not 500, it's roughly around 450 gig. So what we do need to do, the plan is basically, it's not Windows, so we're installing a Linux server, so it's not going to be the same disk formatting systems like you use in Windows. So the Windows, a lot of people who just working Windows, they do not know what Windows file systems are. So there are different kind of file system. So one of the file system in Windows is called NTFS. Okay, don't ask me what NTFS stands for because I don't work with Windows. Therefore, that NTFS file systems is for Windows. That cannot work with Unix-based systems. So you can't have NTFS file system. So the first thing we're going to look into the disk bandwidth, and a lot of people use NTFS because they use Windows. So when the disk is sent as postage, it probably comes with NTFS. So the first thing we need to do is basically get rid of that NTFS bit, and we basically have the full disk, and then we're gonna create a partition table. Okay, so in order to create a partition table, we have to make sure that it is actually an MS-DOS format or a file allocation table or a FAT32 format. So that's you create a partition table. Once you create a partition table, then inside of that partition table, you have an option of either putting an NTFS file system, or you can put out different file systems. So in our cases, you can have LVM, logical volume manager, which is basically under extended partition table. Why is that? So I know that I'm covering a lot of theory here, but just try to understand what's going on. Any disk, okay, by default will have 3 primary partition table, and that is maximum it can allow. So you can let's say you have a slice of pie. Let's say you have a pie, you can make only 3 pieces of that pie. That is the rule. Okay, so let's say the people who are organizing the table, and you have a pie, you can only have 3 pieces from that pie. You cannot have more than that. But that's not good because you have like 10 people, let's say. Okay, so how are you going to do that? So in order to get rid of that issue, in the systems, you can create a what we call extended partition table, logical volume. So in that extended partition table, you can have multiple partitions. So instead of having 3 sections of the pie, you can have hundreds of different sections. Okay, so that is something that you need to understand. So why we need that? Because we're going to create different partitions in that disk. Okay, so we'll have partitions for sub, which is basically a memory partition. We can have a partition for root, which is for our Debian, and then we have also partition for home partition. We also have some storage partition. We call it under extension 3 find which are running systems. So in order to do all that, we need to actually create extended partitions. Okay, so I'm not going to create all those individual partitions because that we do during the installation process of Debian systems or any of Linux systems. Okay, but we have to actually prepare the disk in such a way so that it is actually ready for Debian installations, and that is exactly this lecture is all about. So let's jump right in. So this is Debian 13. I installed it only a few weeks back. So from here, so the first thing I'm going to do is basically I'm going to go to the command line, okay, or the command prompt or command shell. And from here, as you can see, this is not a course for Linux, so I'm not going to go too much details. So this is basically, if I type UMI, it tells you Megan, which is one of my cats, across the Rainbow Bridge in 2020, and that is the user, okay, the username. But if I type host name, that tells you the second part of that particular prompt. Okay, so you can see the bush cat. So the bush cat is the host name of the bush cat, not the username. So any Linux systems will have first username and then @ and then your host name. Okay. So from here, what I can do pwd. So it basically print working directory. So it tells you the path where I'm standing in terms of the system. Okay, so that's cool. So that you know where we are. So from here, for example, if I type df -h, that's the command. Df is the command, and -h is basically telling them to show the different size of the partition in human format. The -h means human. So what it means basically, instead of showing it in a kilobyte or megabytes, it's can see that the partition I have in this computer is basically, you have this particular operating system, you have SDN. So device is the root is, and then device is the file systems, and then you have SD10, that everything in Linux is file systems. Okay, so these are all files. It's nothing physically you can look at, but that's pretty good because SD10 is actually representations of the files. The SD10 is one of the partition that has 92 gig size, and then I have used only 10 gigabyte, and that is a root partition, okay, for that particular operating system, that is Gparted in this particular machine. And then you have a lot of bunch of temporary directories that is created when you actually installed the system. You don't have to worry too much about that. And then you have SDA11, and that is basically my home partition. You can see that I have given 100 gigabyte of home partition. So these partitions actually come under your extended partition table. Okay, so I'm going to show you in a minute how that actually been created. And then obviously you have SDB, and now you can suddenly think that SDA changed to SDB. What it means that new disk I bought, that is actually docked into that station I told you, that is B. Okay, so that is external disk. Okay, so that is why the representation number has changed from A to B. So all you have to see is basically the path where it is mounted into /media/megas new volume, and they created the name called new volume when I bought it. Okay, and it is actually 466, not 500 gigabyte. Okay, so that 466 gigabyte is good enough, and you need to note it down at one point. So I'm going to note it down is 466 gig, because that will help me to, when I actually create what do you call it, when I actually start installing the Debian13 into my disk, in that new disk, then I know how to allocate what I need to allocate. So it's actually 466 gigabyte, not 500 gigabyte. Okay, so 500, the sell it as 500 gigabyte is a market gimmick. Okay, so anything is never gonna be 500 gigabytes. So when you buy 1 terabyte, this is never 1 terabyte. Okay, this is roughly 950 gig. Okay, so always remember that, but it doesn't really matter much because you're not losing any money. 466 gig is good enough. So all you need to see here is basically SDB. It's not A. Okay, so SDB, and that number 2, it doesn't really matter what it is. You don't really have to worry about that. SDB is the one that you need to remember. So from here, if I type lsblk, which is basically another command, okay, and that command actually show you in a different level in terms of the path. Okay, not just the path, but also it just shows you the partition is a little bit more readable, understandable. So you can see from here that SDA5 is actually started becoming a standard partition table, and then I have Red Hat into that system, and then I also have Debian 12 and Debian 13 as well. So these are all partition, and then you come to SDB, which is basically the one that is stationed into the dock, and it has that path as well. The number can change a little bit. Here it's 465.7 gig, but it's all good. But we want to see the graphical representations. But you can do all these commands that you can do whatever I'm going to do now in Gparted software. It's like a GUI interface to do things in a button clicking. But you can also do everything into the command line. But instead of doing it in the command line, which is more error prone, because unless you're really seasoned sysadmin, it can be very error prone. Okay, therefore, I wouldn't be doing it into the command line. Not just that, because I actually don't know how much to do it. I can know some basics about it, but I don't want to get into too much. But I'm going to do it in the Gparted partition. So let's jump right in and fire up the Gparted. So if you did Linux systems, the Debian systems, then you go into administration, and right into the administrations, you will see something called Gparted, which I installed it. So you click Gparted right here, and it's going to ask you the root password. Okay, so I'm going to put out the root password right here, because this can potentially damage your systems if you do not know what you're doing. Therefore, you need the root password to get into it. So in here, this is a lot better, right? You can see what's going on in terms of the graphical representation of the slices of the disk. So the whole disk, this is the disk. This is not the disk that I'm going to extend, but this is the main disk where I'm working with, right? So in that case, you can see the 300 gig is NTFS for my Windows, because I shrunk it to 300 gigabyte for Windows. That's good enough because I don't particularly use Windows much. And then I create an extended partition table in SDA3, and that suddenly after SDA3 it's all become SDA 5, 6, 7. That's the way Linux system works. So that extended partition table, you can see in the background there's a green or some kind of a teal green kind of color there, and that is extended partition. That's exactly what we need to do. Why? Because then we can create different partitions in it. So we have more than 3 partitions, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 partitions, and you can only do that if you create a logical volume, and that is extended partition. Okay, you cannot do that by default, because in default any hard disk only allow you to do 3 primary partitions. So we already have more than 3 primary partitions. We don't need a primary partition. Windows NTFS is a primary partition, so it's only have system reserved for 500 megabyte, that's primary, and then NTFS 300 gigabyte for C drive for your SDA2, that's your primary partition, and you're left with only one partition afterward. So if you're doing dual booting or multi-booting with Linux systems alongside Windows, you gotta create extended partition table. So this lecture is going to show you exactly how to do that. Okay, so now this is an SDA. This is the really nice, cool graphical interface. So drop down menu, and you can do the SDB, and this is the partition. Okay, this is our brand new. Well, this is brand new to me. So this is our brand new 465.75. Okay, so I took 466. Actually, it's 465.75. So okay, so this is our disk. Okay, and you can see it came with NTFS. Okay, so this is not what we want. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do from here, we're going to unmount it. So just click that black one first. Okay, and then unmount it. Okay, I think you can unmount, or just delete it. You can delete it right here. So we don't need that. And this one we can delete it as well. So in order to delete it, because it's active, we can unmount it by clicking unmount right here. So it's gonna unmount it because at the moment it's active. That's why it will not allow you to actually delete that partition. So now it is unmounted. So you can choose that from here, or you can choose it from here, and then right click it, and then you delete it, because I don't need NTFS partition, because it is not gonna be Windows systems. It's gonna be our Debian target system. So we're gonna delete that partition. Now you have unallocated total 465.76. Okay, so I put down 466. That's good enough. 500 gigabyte disk. Can you see that? So they kind of use a marketing gimmick when they sell it as 500 gigabyte. So this is actually 465.76 gigabyte unallocated disk. And this is clean disk at the moment. So we're going to click check right here to do this operation. Click apply. So this is deleted NTFS partition. I don't need any of those things that came when I bought this disk. Okay, so that's cool. Click close that. Now it's all easy, right? So in order to do that, you can do all that things what I've done in your command line, but it's more error prone, and you need a little bit of a seasoned understanding of what you're doing by writing Linux commands. So it's not better doing it in Gparted. So this lecture is more about Gparted, right? So I'm showing you how to do work with Gparted, and I'm giving you some basics idea about how the systems work and how the Linux systems, file systems, structures, and the disk layout. So now you have 465.76 gigabyte unallocated. The first thing we need to create is partition table. Okay, so you go to device in here and create partition table. Okay, click that, and it's going to be, you can have an MS-DOS, or you can also have an option of creating a FAT, or file allocation table 32 somewhere, I believe. Oh, it doesn't have it. Oh, that's cool, no problem. So you can choose FAT. You can do GPT partition table as well if you want, but in my cases I'm going to stick with MS-DOS, which is Microsoft is supporting MS-DOS partition table, and that should be fine. You don't have to do it with Windows though. Don't get confused with MS-DOS by thinking that creating a partition table of MS-DOS. You can create MS-DOS partition, then you have to create NTFS partition table in partitions in it. Do files NTFS file systems in it. So MS-DOS allow you to create extended partition table. Okay, so what we're talking about is different LVM file systems. Okay, so we just gonna say MS-DOS and click apply. Okay. now this is done. So now that we create a just partition. Now you can go to partition and new partitions. Okay, so you cannot create a new partition until you create a partition table. Remember that. Okay, so you have to create a partition table. In our cases, we create a MS-DOS partition table. So it's basically, if you want to take a food, if you have a food, you have to put it in the table. So you create the table first and then put the food on the table. You cannot just do the other way around. You know, you cannot put the table food on the floor and then put the table on the food. You know what I mean? So we created a table, and now we're going to create a partition. Okay, so new partitions. Okay, so we're going to create new partition, create new, and now you can see in here, this is really important, because in here you can see create as primary partition. We don't want that, because if you create a primary partition, then it will only allow you to create 3 primary partitions. We don't want that. We want to create a funnel or container where we can actually put a lot of different partition, separate different sections of the partitions. Okay, so don't get confused with partition table and partition. Partition table is a table for creating different sections of which is called partition as well. So from here, so we're going to create as extended partition, the one that I was talking about before. And once you create extended partition, one thing you notice is basically everything changes. It doesn't allow you to do anything else, because it's going to be LVM, which is the logical partition. Okay, so from here you can actually level it, and I'm going to level it as extended. Okay, extended. It's because it's extended partition. You can label it as for your own informations. And free space by default is created. Don't even think about making it 0 or making it 2 or anything. Just leave it the way it is and click add. And you can see the one thing I mentioned before, that the thing that happened here is basically the background is a kind of teal color, right? Not green, not really blue. In between them two, what you call it, teal, right? So you got the teal blue color. When it comes as extended partition, you know, level is extended as well. What it basically means is basically a funnel, okay, where you can have a lot of different partitions in it. Okay, actually the name is getting a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do here, let's see whether we can actually yeah, we'll just delete that. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. The reason I'm doing it again is very simple. I don't like the extended level. Okay, so create extended partition, change the level. I'm going to change it to bush cat. Okay, bush cat. Okay, that makes sense. Bush cat. Yeah, bush cat. Just leave it bush cat. So now extended partition is called bush cat. It's 465.76 and click hit that press button, click apply. So now it's created. Okay. So one thing before I conclude this lecture, I just want to go back to the command line. That one thing you see that is actually extended partition. It is no longer classed as NTFS or anything like that, and we have 465.76 extended partition. Okay, so we don't need to do anything else in here. We're not going to create different partition inside in it, because that is the thing that we install the operating system. So this particular extended partition that we created is going to hold our Debian 13 that I will install. Okay, so this lecture is not going to cover that. Once I finish the installations, then I'll show you again what I have done. Okay, so we're going to click it right here to kill it, and then we go back to the command line, and we wouldn't be able to see it because we have unmounted it. Okay, so you wouldn't see SDB anymore because we have done our work. So in order to mount it, I could shut the disk off, maybe. Yeah, so from the port you have a button there, you can shut the disk off. Okay, so that basically this is off now from that port for the dock stations I'm talking about. Okay, and then what happened there is basically it's gone from here. You can see in the file managers, and then you can actually turn it back on. So turn it back on, then it can be mounted. There's one way of doing it. You can do it command line as well to do the U mount. So mount command, you know, but in that cases it may not work. We have changed the partition table, so we have to basically actually started it back on again, and we just have to wait a bit and see what happens here. It's not showing up. Let's just take a look df minus h. Right, okay, so it's not showing up. I don't know why it is not showing up, but I'm sure it is showing up in Gparted. It's not showing up in command line, but it's not a matter. It's not really a matter at all. I'm sure it is mounted. So we go to Gparted. 69, press enter. We can mount it from here as well, I think. So if we do drop down, it should show SDB. Here we go. There we go. So it's mounted, I think. Right. Okay. So well, okay, you cannot mount it because we actually didn't create any partitions in it. That's why there's no partition in it. That's why it's not mounted, and that's fine. But the disk is there. Okay. So this lecture, I know it can be a little vague because I don't often do it. So you know, it's kind of vague for me in some degree as well. But the most important take-home lesson you know, when you get a disk, you need to create extended partition if you want Linux systems or any other systems into it, not Windows. Okay, so Windows need NTFS file system. Okay, so that one take-home message. The other take-home message is tools. So we utilize a Gparted tool, and that Gparted tool is only available in Linux servers, Linux systems. So you cannot have Gparted under Windows. Okay, so they have their own different tools, and you have to pay for it. But this is one way of doing it. You can do it in MS-DOS free. Okay, so you know the DOS command in Windows, so that's cool. You can do it. You can do it in DOS shell in a command. Okay, so in command everything is free in Windows as well. So you can use command prompt or shell prompt in DOS in Windows and do everything's free. Okay, you don't have to pay for anything. But because people just pay for GUI interfaces for price for software, but you don't have to do that in Linux systems. But in any case, it's Gparted. So that's the second take-home message. Third take-home message, most crucial and most important one, is basically primary and extended partition, the differences between them. So when you buy a disk, you can actually have 3 primary partitions, and you cannot do anything more than that. And that is a limitations because you want to have disks with several different partitions, where you have your database servers running, or maybe you have storage for different media, and you have your operating system files in it, and then you have boot partition as well. For example, in Red Hat, we also need to create a swap partition to a memory, like a backup memory kind of things, or virtual memory. And then we also have to create our home partition where our home paths live. Okay, so if you combine all these, then it's definitely more than 3 partitions you created, and that is not allowed if you just have the primary partition systems. Okay, so that's why we have to create extended LVM, or logical volume manager, where we can funnel different partitions, which I'm gonna do when I install Debian. So Debian system on Debian 13. A friend of mine, I'm talking, one of my friend, a good friend of mine called Jill. We're talking about it, and she said to me that you know, you can create as many partitions you want, because if you want to become Java full stack developer, it's up to you how you're gonna lay your disk out. Okay, but she said that, you know, she usually just keep it by default, like root partitions and everything's there. That's one way of looking at it. But in most cases, you can have swap partitions for your memory, virtual memory, and then you have a root partition where system files live, and then your home partition for doing your work, and then obviously you have some storage spaces where you can keep files in there. So that's one way of looking at it. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So this 465 is going to be laid out as like 2 GB of swap, and then 200 GB of a root partition, and then maybe another, I do not know, 200 GB, maybe 250 gig for our root partitions, because the root is the places where you're gonna have install all your operating systems or servers, you know, all kind of different software packages. So maybe I go for 200 gig there, or maybe 250 gig there, and rest of the stuff for home and the storage. Okay, so that would be the layout. So I hope this lecture has given some shade of light, and hopefully you will work with Linux systems. I don't want to make the lecture more than half an hour, so this is like one